The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, our government was elected because Canadians wanted a change from a government stuck in the ways of the past. Canadians wanted a government that was bold enough to look to the future and embrace a new vision for Canada. The need for a new vision, a forward-thinking plan for the future, which embraces innovation and places Canada on the international stage in the realm of science and technology, is a concept which has been embraced in my riding of Kitchener Centre. As a part of the Kitchener-Waterloo region, our potential for growth and prosperity was stymied by the lack of attention that the previous government paid to science, research and innovation. Thankfully, our government has put us back on the right path, one which will support industry and growth while fostering knowledge and innovation. Now, I know there will be some on the other side of the House who will argue that they did not ignore science or research. Well, Madam Speaker, my background is in science, and this background in the evidence-based field means that I like to have the hard facts in front of me. So let's talk about some facts. In 2012, the Canadian government invested less in research and development, $28.8 billion US, than the government did in 2004, when it invested $22.7 billion. Madam Speaker, that approach was one which didn't make a lot of sense. In order for Canada to maintain its position as a world leader in research and development, growth and investment are essential. And doing our part by investing in research and development is an obvious path to ensuring growth and prosperity. There's a metric that is used to quantify how a country is doing with its investments in R&D. It's called GERD, or Gross Domestic Expenditure on Research and Development. Simply put, GERD is the amount of money a country spends on research and development. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, if we look at how Canada compares to other countries, we aren't doing so well on this front. In fact, in 2012, Canada fell from its spot in the top 10 to 12th in terms of real spending for research and development. Not a great performance, to be sure. But as in many other cases, the raw spending only tells half the story. In order to compare Canada's spending on R&D to that of other countries, it is far more useful to use GERD as a percentage of GDP. This is a commonly used measure internationally as an indicator of the country's degree of R&D intensity. In my opinion, it conveys how important R&D can be to a country and to an economy. Unfortunately, we don't perform well on this front either. According to the OECD average ratio of GERD to GDP in 2013 was 2.36. With Israel, Japan, South Korea, Sweden and Finland leading the world, calling Canada a laggard is being generous. Looking at the rank list of countries, we don't even make the top 20. In 2013, Canada's ratio of R&D spending as a percentage of GDP was 1.69, down from 1.79 in 2012. Among G7 countries, Canada ranked 5th in 2013, and its ratio of GRD to GDP was lower than the United States, which was 2.73. Madam Speaker, it is difficult to imagine how Canada could be competitive on the world stage if we were to continue falling behind in R&D spending. A Global Mail piece in 2013 noted that in one vital area where government really can make a difference, innovation, Ottawa's commitment has been inconsistent and its investments wanting. And I think that quote really sums up the previous government's lack of interest in prioritizing science, research and innovation. We know that when government chooses to make a difference by investing in innovation, that we can create good middle-class jobs, develop the technology of the future, and create a more competitive Canada. I'm sorry to say that the previous government failed to take advantage of Canada's potential in this area. Well, Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to say that we're committed to turning this around. That is why I'm so proud to see that our government is developing an innovation agenda which we firmly believe will position Canada as a world leader in turning ideas into solutions, science and technologies, skills into jobs, and startup companies into global successes. Our budget recognizes the importance of research, development, and innovation. I'd like to take a few moments to talk about just some of the highlights from our budget, which are demonstrative of just how committed to this advancement of science, innovation, and technology we really are. First, Madam Speaker, our government is investing $2 billion over 3 years in strategic infrastructure at post-secondary institutions. Madam Speaker, I cannot say just how vital this is. If we want to be able to perform world-leading research, we need to have world-leading facilities. With this investment, not only will our students be able to work in some of the best facilities, but we will have the opportunity to make our facilities some of the most environmentally friendly facilities in the world. Imagine the best minds conducting cutting-edge research at some of the most up-to-date modern sites available. Madam Speaker, my region is home to many excellent post-secondary institutions. While we often talk about the value and importance of post-secondary education, there is much less focus on the details behind post-secondary education. Tuition rates have risen sharply over the last decade with little relief for students. That's why measures like increasing the amounts available under the Canada Student Grants Program are so vital to ensuring the continued success of our students. We need to do our best to make sure that education remains accessible to as many students as possible, and that we continue to back our desire for increased access to post-secondary education with concrete actions to make that possible. Canada has some world-leading research facilities. It is essential that we fund them properly so that they are able to properly do their work. Our government is investing $30 million for Canadian Institutes of Health Research, $30 million for the National Sciences and Engineering Research Council, $16 million for the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and $19 million for the Research Support Fund to support the indirect costs borne by post-secondary institutions in undertaking federally sponsored research. In addition, our government is providing an additional $46 million to the granting councils. These councils, namely the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, and the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, support and promote high-quality research in a vast array of areas. We must do our part to support them. Madam Speaker, as someone with a background in science, I was stunned when the previous government cut funding to the Experimental Lakes region in Northern Ontario. What really surprised me, however, was how public the opposition to that was. Who would have thought that cutting funding to such a program would galvanize the public the way it did? Not only has the government restored funding to the Experimental Lakes area, but we have also increased our funding for ocean and freshwater science, including monitoring and research activities. Science is important to this government, Madam Speaker, and it is not just Canadians that will benefit from a renewed focus on data and evidence. People across the world will benefit from the research we conduct here at home. Speaking of evidence-based policy, Madam Speaker, our government made it a priority to restore the mandatory long-form census. The data collected by the census is essential for planning and spending purposes. Not only did we restore it, but Canadians responded extremely enthusiastically to its return. Madam Speaker, we made international headlines when, in our eagerness to complete the census, we crashed the website. Now that is something we can be proud of. I have just one more highlight, Madam Speaker. As an MP from the Kitchener-Waterloo region, I was thrilled to see that the Perimeter Institute received $50 million. For those of you who don't know, the Perimeter Institute is a world-leading facility in the field of theoretical physics. Madam Speaker, the Finance Minister got it right when he said that the Kitchener-Waterloo region is home to some of the most brilliant, innovative minds and companies in the world. Madam Speaker, I am excited to see the developments that come from this funding. We are working hard to lay the foundation so that our researchers, thinkers, and dreamers are able to see their projects carried through to fruition. Our future is so bright, and we have such potential that is waiting to be tapped, harnessed, and encouraged. I'm confident that while we have had some fantastic achievements in the past, they are nothing compared to what we will see in the future. Once again, I would like to commend the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister for commitment to championing a research and innovation agenda, one that I'm sure will serve Canadians well now and into the future. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my neighbour from Kitchener for his speech. And actually, Madam Speaker, there's parts of his speech that I totally agree with him on, that the Waterloo region is home to some of the best post-secondary education facilities in the world, and also research facilities. I couldn't disagree with him on that at all. But, Madam Speaker, I'm wondering if he's upfront with his constituents that this government is adding $15 billion per year in deficit in terms of just the debt load that we will be responsible for. Just the interest costs alone, Madam Speaker, are going up by $15 billion a year between today and 2020. So I'm wondering, Madam Speaker, if my colleague could tell us which generation does he think will actually be able to pay off this huge Liberal debt? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank my good friend and neighbor and someone who always looks out for me and always gives me advice, so I'd like to give him a little bit of advice today. So economically, we know right now in the world, we have a zero lower bound interest rate. We know when we look at the 10-year government bond rate, whether it's in the United States at 2%, whether it's in Japan at 0.5%, whether it's Germany at 0.5%, or whether it's at Japan at 0.2%, we know that the inflation targets right now are less than 1%. Madam Speaker, this is the absolutely best time in our history, in the history of the world probably, where investment in infrastructure is so important, whether it's public infrastructure, public transit infrastructure, social infrastructure, or environmental infrastructure. So I want to thank my honourable friend for the opportunity to give that answer. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Belleuil.
The honourable member for Belleuil. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The member has just given us an eloquent explanation of reasons why we must invest in infrastructure, and we agree with that. But what we don't agree with is a plan to privatize our public infrastructure, and that's exactly what the government is proposing with this infrastructure plan. At a meeting today, no fewer than 8 ministers were in attendance. They met with multi-billionaires in Toronto to explain how they're going to charge us twice, once through our taxes and once through tolls, by privatizing our public infrastructure. We heard comments earlier about who campaigned on the left or on the right, but can my colleague admit that after all these great progressive promises of investment into public infrastructure, they're going even further what the Conservatives dared to do by selling off our public infrastructure and having taxpayers pay twice rather than once?
Madam Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, this is the best time in our history to invest in infrastructure, and we have a very bold and ambitious agenda. And whenever you have a bold and ambitious agenda, you have to keep an open mind and a broad mind about everything. I'm quite confident, Madam Speaker, that the government will be responsible, will be ambitious in its approach, and I hope that my honourable friend will work with us to make sure that we create the right infrastructure for all Canadians. Thank you.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his speech. Obviously, there's some parts in there that I could also agree with. As the first female engineer in the House of Commons, I was happy to collaborate with the Minister of Science to come with a better plan for science for Canada. But in the rest of the budget, did you miss the part that says you promised a $10 billion budget and... Oh, sorry.
To address to the chair, the questions or the comments?
You're absolutely right that having promised $10 billion deficit, this government is now pushing its way past 30, and out of the 87 infrastructure projects that were approved, most of which were in the pipeline with our government, only a handful are actually in the ground. They missed the construction season. So, Madam Speaker, there is no plan, and what would the member say about that?
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Madam Speaker, we were elected on real change, and real change means thinking out of the box, being innovative. And I think the honourable member, I congratulate her on being the first female engineer in the House. I'm the first pharmacist in the House. So I think that, scientifically, through innovation, through infrastructure, I know that what we are doing right now is going to be historic, and it's going to work for all Canadians. Thank you.
We have time for a very, very brief question. The honourable member for Ottawa Centre. South, sorry. I'm sorry.
That's fine, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much for that. It's okay. Madam Speaker, thank you to my colleague for his remarks. Madam Speaker, I've always believed the single most important investment a nation can ever make is in learning. If we're going to compete, thrive into the future, we need the smartest workforce on the planet. Can the member take a few minutes and expand on some of the things we've been doing in the budget? For example, we've increased the grants now for college and for university students, kids going into trades. We've doubled the summer employment program for jobs. He comes from a community which is strongly steeped in college and university traditions. Can he maybe take a second and
We're running
expand?
out of time at this point, so if we want him to answer, we will give him that chance right now. Kitchener Centre, member for Kitchener Centre, a very brief response, please.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. The next generation of Canadians will need the right tools. As he mentioned, you know, the Canada Summer Jobs Grant was doubled. We've invested $2 billion over the next 3 years in post-secondary institutions. We've also tried to make sure that we've invested in infrastructure, public transit, in other areas which will help the next generation of Canadians. Thank you.